I think we can start off with the event. Gautam?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining us in the event Learn with Us Data Science and AI. I am Gauri Rajesh, member of the Microsoft Learn Student Ambassador community and one of your speakers for today. For those of you who don't know, the Microsoft Learn Student Ambassador is a global community for students to learn and grow by interaction and empowering our fellow learners to adopt the path of knowledge. I would now like to introduce my fellow speakers, Gautam Shanbag and Arohi Jain. We all are currently pursuing our third year of engineering in computer science and are highly passionate about technology and how it can help transform people's lives. Our goals resonate strongly with that of Microsoft to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. So without further ado, I would like to call Arohi to carry forward the presentation.
Thank you, Gauri, for a wonderful introduction. So, hey guys, thank you for joining today's event. So, before I start off, I would just like to outline the general plan that we have for this event. First, I'll be talking a little theory and deep learning are. Then we will be going towards a live demonstration of real-time projects, and then we will conclude with a little introduction to Microsoft Azure and what that is. So, generally, when people hear the terms data science and AI, there's a lot of confusion regarding what path that one must follow to learn these topics. There is no specific path as such defined by any researcher or engineer, but this is the general path that people follow. That is, data analysis being the prerequisite for any AI, machine learning, or a deep learning project, as the data that we usually have is not organized in a form that the system or we can understand. So data analysis is usually a prerequisite before we dive into any artificial intelligence, machine learning, or a deep learning project. So with that being said, go ahead. Why data science is relevant? Data in olden days usually meant like maybe memorizing people's phone numbers, birthdays, addresses, or any other information. Data in today's world also means the same, but the scope and how we use the data has changed drastically. There are so many machines around us like our smartphones, smartwatches, laptops, and computers. These devices are constantly monitoring our activity, and due to this monitoring, they're able to track what our preferences are, and basically this constitutes the data that companies have on us. The recommendation systems of Spotify, Netflix, the ads that we see on websites, they all work on the machine learning algorithms based on the data that we provide them. Due to the use of this data, the businesses have grown at such an exponential rate that the demand of data scientists across the globe has also risen drastically. Now let us talk about what data science is. Data science is simply the art of collecting data, analyzing the data, and just trying to make sense of the data that we have. This can be done to solve any real life problem or just to have a basic understanding of what the data represents. This can be done by plotting graphs or maybe scatter plots or histograms or in any other way that can help a person make any sense of the data that is provided to us. Some of the reasons for the rise of data science in today's world is the vast amounts of data that is currently being generated. The 90% of data that exists in today's world is generated in the last 2 years alone. Every minute, more than 300 hours of YouTube videos are being uploaded, more than 2.4 million searches are done on Google, and more than 13,000 hours of music is being heard on Spotify. So one can only imagine the growth of data in, say, the next 5 years. Another reason for the rise of data science in today's world is the rise of inexpensive computing. To give an example for this, I can say that when NASA first decided to send the astronauts on its moon, the computational power that they had was less than that of what we use in today's scientific calculators. So that's one reason. Large amounts of data require large amounts of computing, and today's world is ready for it, as compared to say 5 years ago or 10 years ago. One more reason for this is the rise in cloud computing. Microsoft Azure, being a cloud computing service, provides CPU cycles, additional storage, and other other things that might require to handle big data. We will be talking about this a lot more in further slides. So I'll leave that at that. Yeah. Moving ahead, some of the skills that are required by a data scientist are hacking skills or programming skills. What I mean by this is a data scientist will have to know a basic SQL before he dives into a project, because the data that we have needs to be organized in tables, or it needs to be cleaned or organized, and for this SQL skills are important. And another language, if I say, that is important for any data science project is Python, because Python has a vast number of libraries that are really helpful when we are trying to build any project or an application. Another point is the maths and the statistical knowledge. Given any data, we might have to apply our maths knowledge to it, like to find means, to find standard deviation, and we will be seeing a live example of this when we go towards the demonstration of the projects. So that is important if we know that beforehand. Another thing is we'll have to do a substantial amount of research to collect the data that we want to work with. That can be done either online or offline, depending on whatever the person prefers. To any data science project are. Like for this, let me take an example for the spam classification project. First, we'll have to form the question that we want to answer. In this case, the question is the particular mail spam or not spam? Next, we collect the data. Here, the data can be like thousands of emails that can teach the algorithm key this one is spam or this one is not spam. So the data here are basically the emails. Next, we apply our statistical and mathematical knowledge to the data. This is important because this is required to train the model of a data. Next, we get the data organized. The data that we have might not all be relevant. We might have to cut down the data or clean it or organize it to store only the relevant data that have a correlation with the answer. So it's important to get the data organized. And finally, we analyze our data, and the results that we reach, we need to communicate it to the society so that it helps in the betterment and in the future projects that anyone else wishes to do. Okay. So moving ahead to what data analysis is. Data analysis is basically transforming our data. This can include like cleaning it or inspecting it in such a way that will help us answer the question posed and help us reach conclusions or make informed decisions along the way. Moving on to what artificial intelligence is. Artificial intelligence basically refers to machines behaving like the human mind. Now, machines can be programmed to mimic human actions in certain situations. This is what artificial intelligence basically refers to. Machines being trained to behave like the human mind. Now, moving on to what machine learning is. Machine learning is an application or an extension of artificial intelligence, if I can say that. And it is a way in which machines can perform a certain task which they're not explicitly programmed to do so. Like in the spam classification algorithm that I just mentioned, if a new mail is just brought into the algorithm, it is able to predict with a higher, like with a great amount of accuracy, that this mail is spam or not spam. That is machine learning. Now, machine learning can be of three types: supervised learning, unsupervised learning, or reinforcement learning. Supervised learning is where we have input variables and we have corresponding output variables. And output variables are usually functions of the input variables. Now, all supervised learning algorithms can be classified into two categories: regression or classification. An example for regression is like linear regression. Linear regression can be of simple, multiple, or polynomial type. Simple regression is where we have one input variable and one output variable, like one x and one y. And multiple is where we have multiple variables of x and correspondingly one output variable y. We will be seeing a live demonstration of this when we go towards our projects. And real life example for regression can be like stock price prediction, predicting the GDP of a country, the economic growth, etc. For classification problems, the spam classification problem that I just mentioned falls into supervised classification category. Unsupervised learning is where we try to find structure in unlabeled data. here we have only input variables x and we do not have any corresponding output variables. Unsupervised learning can be categorized into two categories again, clustering and outlier detection. And clustering is where we find groups of similar instances in data, and outlier detection is where we find unusual patterns in the data. An example for clustering can be, say, Netflix recommendation systems. Netflix clusters people into specific categories. Say like this category of people, this cluster of people, if I say, like they like thriller movies. So in future, the Netflix recommendation system suggests only thriller movies to this cluster of people. So that is an example for clustering. Moving on to reinforcement learning. Reinforcement learning is where we have a feedback system involved in the network. Like say this algorithm, we feed it an input variable x, the algorithm predicts an output y. This y is fed through a feedback system and the user tells whether the output y was right or wrong. This can help improve the algorithm's efficiency in the future. These are the three types of machine learning. Now moving on to deep learning, I would request Gauri to take over the presentation from here.
Thank you, Arohi. Yes. So coming to deep learning, what is deep learning anyway? Now, deep learning can be thought as the innermost gem of machine learning. So what's our goal by learning deep learning? Our goal with deep learning is to replicate the functioning of the human brain. The brain is a masterpiece in itself, but we all are really, really slow. So just imagine, if you're able to program machines to have the similar functionalities of the human brain, but along with that, we have extremely high computational speed, I believe we can say that we hit the jackpot. So deep learning algorithms work by tweaking the inputs a little each time and differ to the neural networks simply by having more hidden layers. Now, what are the applications of deep learning? Deep learning has a wide range of applications and a few of them are mentioned on this slide. It is used in automated driving to automatically detect objects such as stop signs and traffic lights. It's used in aerospace and defense to identify objects from satellites that locate areas of interest and identify safe or unsafe zones for the astronaut troops. It's used in medical research to detect the cancer cells. It's also used in electronics for automated hearing and speech translation. Sorry? Was anyone speaking right now? Okay, I'll just continue. The most famous application for deep learning is chatbots and service bots, which we would be demonstrating in the projects to come. Now, let's look at a few subtopics of deep learning. Before we get forward, we dive forward into the feed-forward network, I would like to introduce you to artificial neural networks. Now, artificial neural network is basically a neural network that consists of an input layer with the inputs, the weights, the bias, and an output layer. Now, I'll give you an example. If you are planning to go for a football match, let's say you want to go to any football match. Now, there are a number of factors that you would consider before you book your tickets, right? So it might be how's the weather on that day, or what's the cost of the tickets, whether your friends will be accompanying you, or what transportation are you going to use to reach the stadium, and other things like these. Along with these, each person has their own priority for these features, right? So my priority might be what's the weather on that day, and for a few other people, the priority might be what will be the cost of the ticket. So these inputs, along with the priorities, which are known as the weights of the input, are fed to the artificial neural network, and then you would be deciding a threshold value. So when you decide this threshold value, you would be telling the network that once you perform the weighted sum of the input and the weights, if it's going beyond the threshold value, it should give you the output that yes, you should go for the football match. And if it's lesser than the threshold value, you'll say, no, I think you should probably sit this one out. So now coming to feed-forward networks, imagine that you have an artificial neural network and you have the weights, the bias, and you have the output layer. Everything is working fine. But now how do you increase the accuracy and the computational power, right? So this is where the feed-forward network comes in. A feed-forward network consists of multiple hidden layers between the input and the output layer. And when I say hidden layers, it's basically a neural layer which you can't interact directly during programming. So each hidden layer receives its input from all the neurons in the previous layer, and they use this input to compute the cross product between the input and the weight, which is called the weighted sum, and then it feeds it to an activation function. Now, an activation function is basically a mathematical function, but it's used to decide which neurons are fired during the training process of the entire model. Now, this is then carried out throughout the multiple layers and store the significant features and thus improve the accuracy of the model. Now, let's look at an example. Here we have a feed-forward network. This feed-forward network is used to detect which digit is present in the image. Us humans, we are able to understand that, yes, this is 9, but computers don't understand images. So each image is represented by pixels, and these pixel values are fed to the input neurons. From the image, we can see that we have 784 input neurons. These neurons, so the input to these neurons are then fed to the first hidden layer. This hidden layer has its own weights. Now, you might be wondering, what are these weights, right? So when you are performing image classification problems such as this, there will be certain weights which are associated with whether the image is grayscale or color and other factors such as this. So once upon receiving the input for the first hidden layer, it performs a weighted sum and then passes it on to the next hidden layer. So this process continues throughout all the hidden layers present in the network, and we can finally see the output in the output layer. Okay, so now what's backpropagation? When we are building machine learning models, it's almost highly impossible that we can get high accuracy at the first go. And hence we need models that need tweaking and minute changes in the weights. The difference between the expected output and the predicted output is called the cost or the loss of the model. And our main aim is to minimize the loss. Minimizing the loss basically means higher accuracy of the model. And this is what backpropagation is used for. I'll give you an example. Now, when you're performing image classification models for, let's say, an animal data set, you might know that there is something called as a crocodile and an alligator. Crocodiles and alligators are two different animals, but they look really, really similar. We humans, we are able to learn the differences between these, and we can recognize the difference between these two animal classes really easily, but the computer does not really understand what is the difference between these two classes if you do not train it well enough. So the way you can do this is by backpropagation. Backpropagation is a method of traversing back into the hidden layers of the network and then adjusting the weights in such a way that it is, the loss is reduced. So weights are always adjusted exponentially, and we need multiple iterations before we observe the minimum loss in the algorithm. So let's look at a visual representation of backpropagation. This is a feed-forward network for the digit detection in the image, like I previously showed. We would be following the same method as I mentioned, and we would be getting an output. Now, if we do this for just one iteration, the difference between the predicted output and the expected output would be really huge. So you can literally say that the output is utter trash. So how do we reduce the difference between the predicted output and the expected output? So we start with the output layer and move back to the hidden layer. Now we reduce the weights. Reduce the weights does not always mean that, it's not a random function that, it's not a random value that you would be reducing it by. There are formulas that you would be using to reduce the weight exponentially. So once the weights are reduced, this layer is taken as the input for the previous layer, and then the weights are again adjusted to reduce the loss in the final output layer. So in order to minimize the weights, we use an optimization algorithm called gradient descent, which adjusts the weights in the direction of the steepest descent. By this, I mean that imagine that you're standing on top of a hill and your height above the ground is the current loss of the model. So that's really high. Now our aim is to move to the area whose height is the least from the ground. So we can do this by using gradient descent. Now moving on, let's look at recurrent neural networks. A recurrent neural network is a special type of ANN which has the capacity to retain data. So basically it has a memory storage capacity. So the reason we need RNN is because systems such as speech recognition or text translation, we read the entire sentence at once and then perform operations on the same. Now the human brain is trained in such a way that when we read the sentence, we store that in our memory and then we try to understand and make sense of it. But machines can't do that. They always read each bit at a time. So this is where recurrent neural network comes in. So we feed the entire sentence to the network and it will process it in such a way that it's able to retain each word. It would process each word. It would understand what the user is asking it to do, and then it would give us the required output. An example for this, I can say that when we use Google Translate, for example, sometimes when we feed in the sentence in English and ask Google to translate it for us in another language, sometimes it's just a literal translation of words and it will absolutely make no sense in the other language, right? So we don't want that. We want a sentence which really makes sense if you want to communicate with people who speak a different language. So this is where we can use recurrent neural networks. So in recurrent neural networks, we follow similar steps as in the feed-forward network, but the only difference is that each neuron retains the input fed to it, and this input is also fed to the next neuron and along with the input for that particular neuron. So I would take the input X for the neuron H and then retain that and pass that to the next neuron, which would also be getting its own input. So it looks something like a self loop for each neuron, and as you move further down the network, you would be storing more and more data. Now, the only drawback between recurrent neural networks is that they have a smaller memory capacity. And when you perform a back propagation on recurrent neural network, sometimes the data is lost and we may get inaccurate values. So the way to solve this is by using LSTM, which stands for long short-term memory, and GRU, which stands for gated recurrent units. They have large memory capabilities compared to recurrent neural networks and can process large amounts of sequential data, and no data is lost during backpropagation. Both LSTM and GRU is just a modified version of recurrent neural networks. Another example for this also would be in Gmail. When you're writing mail, sometimes you would have noticed that you get predicted text to complete your sentence. Now, how does this work? So Gmail basically stores all the data and it has the data set of all the words that users use while typing their messages. And mostly all the formal emails have almost similar words. So when you're typing in the word, it stores each word in the recurrent neural network, and then it would process that and predict the next word that you would probably write. So that's how it gives us, predictive text and helps us to complete our sentences when we don't really know what to write next. So enough of theory. I will demonstrate a project for you guys. So the first project that we would be looking at would be number recognition. Now, before we get on to machine learning projects, there are certain steps that we would need to follow, like Arohi mentioned. The projects that Arohi mentioned were, the steps that you would take before you actually start building the project. Now, when you are building the projects, there are another set of steps that you would need to follow, which Gautam will brief you on. So the first step when building a machine learning model.
Your voice is breaking between.
Yeah. Is it better now?
Yeah.
Okay. Should I repeat that, or is that fine?
Just repeat the last sentence you said.
Okay, I just said that when you're building a machine learning project, there are another set of steps that you would need to follow, which Gautam will brief you on the next project. But as of now, I'll just carry you forward through the number recognition. So in the first step, we are just importing the library that is used for building machine learning, data science, or deep learning projects. Now, TensorFlow is a collection of APIs built for machine learning and data science by Google. It was first released in 2015 and has now become very popular with machine learning programmers. NumPy, on the other hand, is a library for Python which supports easy operations on large multi-dimensional arrays, and it allows us to work with data and feed it to the machine learning system, because we can't use regular data structures that we do, such as lists or arrays, because all the models need to be they need to have a universal input type. So we would be using NumPy arrays for that. Now, coming to Matplotlib. Matplotlib is again a machine learning library and is used for visualizing the data and plotting graphs. And it's useful for the user to see what output he's getting, and it's able to understand the relation between different types of data. Coming to the second cell, the main hero behind any machine learning or data science projects is, of course, the data. Without data, I don't think machine learning would ever exist. So I would be importing the data set here. Right now, the data set that I have imported is already pre-built and it is available in Keras. And I'm importing it to a variable called data. Now, after importing the data, I would be splitting it into a training set and a testing set. Both the training set and the testing set would have two variables, which is X and Y. X stands for all the features. For example, in the football example that I gave you, I told, right, the weather conditions, the cost of the ticket, all that can be considered as the features. And the Y label would be all the labels of whatever you're expecting as the output from the machine learning model. Now, coming to the third cell, we would be normalizing the data. Now, what is normalization? Normalization, basically, it means that whatever range of values you have, you are going to bring that down and restrict it between suitable range for better calculations and faster computation. So, for example, our data set right now is just a set of images containing different numbers. So, images usually have the range between 0 to 255 in pixels. So we don't want to perform computations on such high values. Even for humans, it's difficult, and though it may not sound difficult for computers, but it would just take a larger amount of time. So to reduce that, we'd be restricting the data to be between 0 and 1. And the way we do that, you can either divide it by 255, or what I'm doing here is I'm just using a predefined function called normalize, which is provided by the TensorFlow library. Now, coming to building the model, I have used a sequential model. There are multiple types of models available that you can use for your specific problem that you're trying to solve. For us, sequential model is the most suitable. There's no particular rule that you should use this model or you have to use that model. It's completely up to you, and it's all based on trial and error method. And the more you work with machine learning algorithms and the more you practice, you'll get a better understanding of what models suit your data. So the second layer is called flatten. Now, flatten it's basically the images can be grayscale or colored, right? So when we have a grayscale image, the data set would be 2-dimensional. When we have colored images, the data set would be 3-dimensional, which is holding red, blue, and green values. So we don't want a 2-dimensional or a 3-dimensional array. So we would be flattening that to a single-dimensional array so that we can pass it to a machine learning model. Now, coming to these two layers here, I know there are 3 dense layers, but I'll tell you the difference between these two and the last one. So the dense layers basically is a hidden layer. It's called dense because it has a large number of neurons in that particular layer, and the number of neurons here we have used 300. Again, this is not fixed. You can experiment with any number of neurons, but the only thing that I would like to mention is that please do not overfit your model. Overfitting basically means that the model would take the minute details in the data set which don't really matter that much, and it would train the model based on those minute features. You might be thinking, isn't that a good thing? You're taking the minute features, won't it be able to, learn better? Actually, when you give it a real-time data, it would not be able to find the similarities between the training data and the test data, because it has been trained to recognize the minute details which may be absent in the real-time data that you may provide it. So it will give you an incorrect prediction. So please do not overfit your model ever. And one way to prevent overfitting is not use too many neurons. So if your prediction is going wrong, then try to reduce the number of neurons and try again. Now coming to the activation function, like I previously mentioned, activation function basically tells you which neurons in the layer should light up or should work during the training process. So we have used a ReLU activation function. ReLU stands for Rectified Linear Unit. So basically this function, what it does is when you provide it a negative input, it would map it to 0. And if you would provide it a positive input, it would be as it is. So you're just basically converting all the negative values to 0, and the positive would be as it is. Now coming to the third layer. The third layer is also dead, but we have only 10 neurons. The reason we have only 10 neurons is because this data set, the problem that we're trying to solve is number recognition. Now number recognition, numbers have digits from 0 to 9. So 0 to 9 is 10 classes. So we have 10 neurons because we want the output from those 10 classes. So that's what it basically makes sense, right? Why would we have 100 neurons in the final layer? We just have 10 outputs, and you want to know what is the output of those 10 final output layers. Now coming to the activation function, I have used a softmax activation function. So what softmax does is that it would give you the probability of the test data belonging to those particular classes. So it would give me the probability of the image belonging to the maybe the probability might be 1.5 or whatever for each class. So that's the softmax activation function. Now coming to the next cell, we have compile and fit. Now compile is similar to what we would do in regular programming. We would compile the program before we actually run it. So this step is similar to that. We would be using the Adam optimizer and sparse categorical cross entropy loss function, and we would be checking for accuracy as one of the metrics. Now Adam optimizer and the loss function is, again, there are multiple types that you can use. And I think what I have used right now is best fit for our model. Like I previously told, it all depends on trial and error. But for certain types of problems that you're trying to solve, few optimizers and loss functions are more famously used. So for image classification, most of them would use Adam and sparse categorical cross entropy for finding the loss. Okay, the next step is to fit the model. Fitting the model basically means training the model, and we would be passing the training data set, which consists of the features as well as the training labels. Now, we have something here called as epochs. Now, epochs basically means the number of iterations that you want to train the model. You remember in backpropagation, I told you that you would have to perform a number of iterations before the loss is minimized. So you can actually change the number of iterations. It's up to you, but start off with what an average number of iterations that you think would work out, and then try increasing it and decreasing it, and just play around with that. So I have just trained the model here. I could have run it for you guys, but it would take some time. So I have just run it, and the final accuracy that I have got is 0.998. Now accuracy will range between 0 and 1, and when you convert that to a scale of 100, we basically have 99% accuracy. Now coming to prediction, the most interesting part of the project. So the way you predict the model is there's a function called model.predict. Model is the name of the model, and the name of the model is model itself. So we would be using model.predict, and then I'm going to pass the testing data set. Testing data set, I would be passing the features so that we get the label as the output. This, the result of the prediction is stored in a variable called PRE, and I'm going to print PRE. Now, when I print the prediction, it's basically just random numbers, which I don't think any normal person could make sense of. I'll tell you what these numbers are. So these numbers basically, as I told in the softmax function, they'll tell you what is the probability of this data belonging to each class. So it will take the first the first item in the data set, and then it would tell me what is the probability of this item belonging to the digit 0 or to the digit 1 and so on. So all these are the probabilities of each item in the data set. Now, we won't really understand that, and we don't want all the probabilities of all the classes. We just want the maximum probability for each item in the data set. We can do that. How do we do that? There's a function called argmax again. I know all these APIs have really made our life really easy. We don't need to do anything much. You just need to understand what's happening, and I guess any person will be able to, build their own machine learning model. So I have passed the predict. I'm going to predict the item 10, and I'm going to pass it to the argmax function. Now the argmax function would give me the index at which it finds the maximum probability. So basically, it's telling me that at index 0, I have found the maximum probability for the item number 10. So at index 0, since we have only 10 classes and digits starts from 0 to 9, at index 0, it basically says that this image is belonging to class 0, which represents the number 0 in digits. So let's just test that. Okay, sorry.
Need more.
I need to run the. Looks like I am training it in front of you guys. Gautam, would you like to continue? Should I, jump back and show the result to them?
It's fine. It's fine. You finish.
So as you can see, our image was a number 0, and we have predicted it correctly as number 0. I can change that, and we can test something else as well. Maybe 5. So it says 1. There we have 1 again. So that's a number recognition project for you all. Gautam, I think you can continue. I'll just stop sharing.
Okay.
Yeah.
One second. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I will start with this thing. Okay. So, hello everyone. I'm Gautam Shanbag. So let's get started with the projects now. Let's get serious for a minute. When we say machine learning projects, we have to follow some rules. And there is someone we all know who taught us how to follow rules, Dora the Explorer. Unlike her, she had only three steps, but in our case it's 7. It's okay. Now 7 steps are like you gather data, you clean the data, you choose a model, and then you train the data. Then you evaluate your model. You want to see how good the model has trained. Then you change the hyperparameter tuning. Hyperparameters are like how Gauri said, the epochs, then maybe the number of neurons, all those things. And finally the predictions. Predictions are maybe it's better if you always divide the whole. Hello. Oh.
Yeah, Gautam, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay. Okay. So as you see, like you change the hyperparameters so that you get more and more accuracy, and then it's always better if you divide the whole data set into 3 parts. First one is for training, second for validation, and third one for testing. When I say validation, it's like you also send in the predicted values, I mean the labels to check. So yeah, this is the one. Now most of the time what happens is when we start with machine learning, we want to know when to use regression, when to use classification, and clustering and all other or whatever other tools we have. But it's always better to start with one point, with a map in your hand. So the first thing what you want to know is, do you have enough data? If you have enough data, good. If you don't have, go get more data. Second thing, are you trying to predict a category? If you're trying to predict something, then it's good. Go ahead and check if your data is labeled. When I say labeled, I mean it's supervised learning. So if it's labeled, then you send it for a classification because you are trying to categorize the whole thing. Okay. So suppose it's if your data is not labeled, you'll do unsupervised learning. Now let's take a step back. You don't want to categorize the data. This time you want to find a quantity. When you want to find a quantity, now you say, okay, you can use regressions. If you are not looking for quantity, there is something else called as dimension reductions, which I have no idea what exactly that means, but they say that's one more thing. So yeah, so these are like the different parts, like a map. So let's get started with the projects now. I am using Microsoft Azure, but you can do the same thing using Jupyter Notebook or any other thing. Even even a Python compiler with all the properly installed libraries will work. So now, yeah, this is a regression problem. So my aim for this project is I want to predict what is the value of y given x. So y is equal. I'm just trying to find a linear equation of form y is equal to mx plus c. So okay, I import all the libraries I need. Those who don't know what the libraries are, here pandas is for data manipulation. NumPy, Gauri told what it is. You don't need OS, but I just installed it and I just imported it anyway. Scikit-learns are the APIs which I'm using for linear regression, and R2Score will be just to check how accurate our model is. Matplotlib just to plot the graph. Okay, I imported the data. Now I downloaded this data set from Kaggle. We'll be posting all the data set which we have used in all these projects on GitHub repository, so you can also build all the projects by yourself. Okay, so now we are training the data set. I classified 2 data, like training and testing. I don't have enough data to validate, so I don't want to do that, and I didn't find enough data. So now, okay, what I will do is like, how is my training data looks like? That's something we always want to see. So I will say training data. This is how it looks. There's X and there's Y. So, but you can't just feed it like this into a neural network. So what I will do is like, I will take all the X in one variable, take all the Y in another variable. That's what I'm doing right now here. I'm just trying to basically take different X and Y. Then I'm checking, is there any null value in my data set? What happens is, if you have null value, it's like an additional unwanted information in some cases. So what you don't want it in your data set. It's like all this, you know, unproductive data. So what happened? This is one thing. Now we have to clean the data. So when we are cleaning the data, like what happens is it's not the same thing what we expect all the time. The data is not the same thing we expect. So you might be thinking that you need an integer, data set, but you may end up getting float. Then it's not. That doesn't mean that it won't work. You can just convert it and clean it. If it's mixed up, you can just sort it out. So that's what we are doing here. So I'm just asking my compiler. I'm asking how many null values are there in my data set. So it will give me a number, and I'm telling if there is a null value, discard the whole row. I don't want any of it. So that's what these two lines are doing. Drop NA and isNA is like, is there a null function? Drop NA is like remove the whole row. We don't want that. So even I'm doing the same for testing. Once this is done, what I will do is like I will change everything into a NumPy array. Now there is a lot of like when I started learning my machine learning and all this, so I just wanted to know why we have to use a NumPy array when we have the old conventional like we have a list. So the thing is NumPy is faster than list. Why is that? Because NumPy stores the data right next to each other. Even though in the list it looks like it may look to you like you're storing it next to each other, but it's not exactly the way it is. It's storing in like 7 or way too many locations in your hard disk or hard drive. So you use NumPy, so it's right next to each other. So that's why we convert everything into a NumPy array, and NumPy offers some good mathematical operations, so it's easier. You don't have to write everything from scratch. So we'll run this. We want to know what is the shape of the data set. So now we know it's like 699. There is 699 rows, in the data set. But what happens is I want to make sure my data will adjust according to the model. I am using a linear regression model. So given X, I need a Y. So I'm telling the model just predict the equation of the line. So I'm reshaping the data exactly the way I need. I'm telling I don't care how many columns rows you make, but I need everything to be in one column. Similarly, you can change it if your model requires everything to be in like in as many one row but as many columns as you want. So you can just change it, or vice versa, or you can give any number you want. So once that's done, I'm telling the model that I need a reshape. Yeah. So I reshaped the model. Now I'm passing it everything into a linear regression. I'm asking for a linear regression model, and then I'm telling normalize my data. Now the main reason why normalize is we don't want the model to so that it's easier for the model to predict. The thing is, let me give an example. Imagine there are two parameters, age and income. Now a normal human being will be like his age will be like from 0 to 100, whereas assuming this thing income can be from 0 to 10 lakhs. Now that's very big wide range of data to just to pass into anything. So what we'll do is like we want to normalize. Normalize means I'm telling my compiler make sure you bring down both of them to a same scale so that it's easier to plot a graph for you. So that's what I'm doing for normalization. Once that's done, now we'll pass in all the X test data set to check how much our model has learned, and we'll try to see the accuracy. Okay, so we can see it's 0.988. So it means like it is like very close to 1. That means it has done some good. It has done a good job. So now we'll say, now 1 is a better number. Most of the time you won't even get a positive number. You will get a negative number. So that doesn't mean what your model did was wrong. That means whatever assumption you thought of is wrong. So like suppose let me say I assume that my model. I will get an equation as like as my X value increases, my Y value will increase. So I'm looking for a positive correlation, but that might not be true, you know. So what will happen is like there may be a negative correlation between the data which I didn't assume. So that's why, you know, I may get the R2 score, which is the accuracy, as like it can go negative. So even it would be same if, you know, you have like there's an overfitting in the model, and then you know, the testing data set is like very wide range. Oh yeah, and when you are trying to you know, set the data to your model, make sure you ask the model to describe the data. So when you data to describe itself, so what happens when I say describe itself, just know what is the mean, average, minimum and maximum, and standard deviation of the data is, because standard deviation will tell us how widely the data has been, you know, distributed, like what is the range. And then we know what all mean is. Maximum and minimum value will help you to know, you know, you have to understand, should I, you know, is there a need for normalization? So all these things will help. Now I finished predicting. I want to confirm whatever my model did is really, you know, is for y is equal to mx plus c, which is a standard, you know, linear curve. So what I will do is like I will take a coefficient of the equation, and I will store it in c. Then I'm also taking the intercept, and I will store it in I, and I will say this is my x is as 20. I can give whatever I want, but let's say 20. So I will like substitute in the equation, and I'll predict my, I'll just see what will be the y value. It's 19.9058. So given x, if I give x as 20, my y value will be 19.90. So now, okay, let's see if you get the same output when you pass it into the model. So if we pass it into the model, we reshape it. We have to do every single thing what we did for the testing on while we are training the data. So if I predict 19.905, now I'm not surprised that the data was very close. I mean, like exactly same. The answer is exactly same because I'm using the same intercept and the coefficient from the model. But let me tell you one thing: if you know the equation of a line, and you just pass in the if you just pass in all the parameter, I mean the data, and you get this from the machine, I think you will be excited. So yeah, this is about a linear a linear regression model project. Now the second thing on the line, I mean the third project is an NLTK project. So now my aim in this project is that I want to see, like I wanted to make a a chatbot, but right now I have my own data here. So I have like 7 different tags. So let's say my data is like having greeting as one tag, and then goodbye like this. I have 7 different tags. So each of this tag has like certain emotions, like greet. And I will tell my day, patterns for this. Like someone can say hello, someone can say good morning, something like that. And I will also have some responses. These will be the responses I want my model, my chatbot to answer. So this is how the data is. It's not necessary that you use the same thing. Really speaking, this is not the way. If you just type in the most, I think, worst chatbot, I think this should pop up. But this is like I'm just trying to give a basic idea. So here, when we start with NLTK, the first thing I want to do is like, I don't want to feed in, like my aim is whenever I type something, my model should understand what am I trying to say. I mean, am I trying, am I greeting, or am I, trying to say I want to go, or am I asking it to tell me a joke or anything? So something like that. So I want my model to know that. And when it knows, it should give me the responses from the data. The steps here is, first I will like tokenize the input given to the model. When I say tokenize, it means it will divide the whole sentence only by words. So if I have a sentence, say suppose I am Batman, so it will divide into like I as a separate word, am as one word, and Batman as the other word, and it will give the output would be a list. Next is stemming. Stemming means if you have a verb which is in like a continuous form, suppose, I am going, I'm coming, I'm walking, running, all this. Sometimes you don't want it to be, in its full form, because, that doesn't, that doesn't help the chatbot or the machine with any, anyway. It's just going to be an extra word which will be there. So we'll just remove that stem from the verb, and we'll just give the main verb. So that's stemming. That process is called stemming. Once that's done, now the main thing is what would be the logic I'm going to employ so that the model will understand. So I will tell my model, see, I am giving you all the inputs. You go through the inputs. If there is a word which you don't understand, you save it in your dictionary. If you don't, if you've already seen the word, discard it. That's what I would be telling. So this is what I mean by bag of words. So now all the data, all the vocabulary the machine has learned will get saved in all words. So once that's done, now every single time, now what am I going to do with that? So I'm iterating over my data, and I'm cleaning it. I'm also, you can see here one more line called ignore words. Sometime you don't want all this punctuations in your sentences, because even that is not going to help. No one, the model has nothing to do if you are excited with if you put a exclamation mark, the model, it's not going to help the model. So you don't want that. So this is the part of the code when I'm like training the model. I'm asking it to learn new words. When everything is done, what I will do is I will pass in the word, all the words what the model has learned so far, and one more variable. One more variable which will have all the new words or the words which are in the new sentence. So I hope everyone knows what one-hot encoding is. So instead of now one-hot, those who don't know what one-hot encoding is, like you use one single, it's like a button, or representing which value to, is active. So if you see binary, if you want to represent 1, it's like usually 0, 1. At the same time, 3 is also 1, 1. So that's difficult to understand. That's difficult to understand. So you want it to be like you're using one-hot encoding, so that when something is like at showing it's 1, that means it's either one of the digits. So yeah, so we are employing one-hot encoding. I'm telling my model whatever the whichever the indexes are 1, that's like those words are there in the input sentences. So I will pass in those words, and I will pass that array into my model. And once when I'm training my model, I would have told what is the emotion. 0 represents funny, 1 represents sad, 3 represents angry, like that. So let me run the model and show how it looks. So these are all the words the model has learned so far, and this is how this is what I meant by one-hot encoding. You see there's a 1 here. That means somewhere in this array, if I say if this is the words, it has learned, thanks is in the predicting or the input word. That's why there is a 1 here. So this 1 represents thanks. If there was 1 here, it would have meant payments, like that. So once that's done, I'm using TensorFlow. Same, I'm using 300. I'm shaping my in the last model I used NumPy to reshape my input data, but here I can do it directly using the TensorFlow. So I'm doing that. I'm finished compiling and I'm running the model. So I'll say hi. Tell me a joke. Okay, so this is like the most basic chatbot kind of thing which you can make with your own data. sometimes it would be better, because right now I know what kind of an output I can expect because I only have given the data. But what happens if you're using something, all this Reddit comments and all, you won't even have, like, you won't even know what reply you will get from the chatbot, and I feel that's exciting. So yeah, these are like the two projects which I wanted to show. Now moving on, Arohi is going to talk a little bit about Microsoft Azure. Arohi.
Will be taking over.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, can you see the screen, guys?
No, Arohi, it's black.
Give me 2 seconds. Is it fine now?
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, that computational power is one of the major reasons why data science has become so relevant in today's world. Microsoft Azure is one such cloud computing service that provides resources like CPU cycles and storage space that makes it easier to handle the vast amounts of data that are required for any data science project. So cloud computing is Microsoft Azure is one of the cloud computing services available. Some of the benefits of using Microsoft Azure are the high computational power it provides, as I just mentioned, the unlimited storage capacities it offers. It can be accessed anywhere from remote locations, so your business is accessible at a global scale. It can be operated at a global scale, and the hardware freedom and reliability. This basically means that you do not have to purchase a storehouse or a warehouse or rent a warehouse where you stack servers upon servers that um, that will help you like store your data. So you have the freedom from hardware. The backup and recovery is also a very important aspect for any cloud computing service. For example, say the warehouse that I just mentioned, in a natural disaster, say it catches fire or something, all your data is basically lost. So, and you do not have any means of recovering it, and your business comes to a standstill. That does not happen when you use a cloud computing service, because you have the assurance of Microsoft that your data will be backed up and it will be stored. So even if it is lost, it is recovered and your business still continues without it coming to a standstill. So using cloud computing also makes it cost efficient. As I just mentioned, like you only pay for the resources that you use. Say you have a laptop that of like say 200 cycles, and during a holiday season like December, like what's going on, you receive orders that your system is not capable of handling. You can upscale or descale according to your business needs. So cloud computing offers that service, and you pay only for the resources that you use. And around the year, for example, say any other month that you do not receive many orders, you do not have to purchase hardware that supports orders in a large scale. So you can descale during those months, and you have the compatibility and the scalability. So cloud computing offers all those services. Microsoft Azure also offers $100 worth of credits to any student who's able to verify using a student ID or a college ID. And more about cloud computing will also be said in the next event that will be hosted by the other MLSs of NHCE. So please look out for that event. To learn more about Microsoft technologies, there is a free learning platform called Microsoft Learn. I urge you all to check out their website, and you can learn a great detail about Microsoft technologies on there. Also, coming to the conclusion, I would like to add that all the contents that we have used for this workshop have been uploaded on the GitHub link, and the link for the GitHub repository will be shared in the chat box, in the chat window. Please look out for that. And all the projects and the data sets that we have used is also uploaded there, so you can work on those projects at your own free time. And moving ahead, these are our email IDs, so feel free to contact us if you have any questions or feedback that you would like to share with us. And with this, I think we'll open ourselves to a few questions if you have any.
Hello, organizers, Gauri, Arohi, Gautam.
Hi.
First off, I would like to say great presentation. It indeed taught us something valuable. And yeah, about scikit-learn and all, I didn't know much. So yeah, it was pretty informative. And my question is, you have you mentioned about Microsoft Learn website, right?
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
there are many, if you go to any of these websites, there are so many courses related to ML and AI and all that. Are there any courses that you recommend? Being the student ambassador, I assume that you will be knowing the courses that you people may have taken.
Yeah, like speaking from personal experience, I can say that there's a course called Fundamentals to Data Science on the Microsoft Learn website. I would recommend that you check that course out. It personally did help me. It's called Fundamentals to Data Science,
All right, and
and
this will be
suppose
found on the Learn, right?
the
Microsoft
Microsoft Learn
Learn.
website. Yeah.
Okay.
Also, guys, just to mention, the Microsoft Learn is open for everyone. So please make use of this opportunity as well. And also about the Microsoft Azure, I have posted all the links in the chat window. You can check them out, and you get $100 worth credit free. Basically, you just have to verify using your college ID, or if you have an official email ID from your college, then you can use that as well. So please do check it out.
Do you have any other questions?
Is Akshat speaking? I'm not able to hear you.
Yeah. Are you here?
Could you please speak a little bit louder, Akshat?
Now I am audible.
Yes. Go ahead.
I just want to ask, as a beginner in data science, what are some projects that I should work on?
I think he's trying to ask some of the projects that he could start working on, if I heard it right.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Gauri, would you like to take that?
Yeah, sure. So basically, you can start off with the most basic project for machine learning or data science is the IRIS dataset. The IRIS dataset project. So basically, IRIS is a kind of flower that you find, and there are three types of IRIS flowers. So the classification of that is the most basic and I guess universal. It's the hello world to machine learning. So I guess we can try to build that. And another examples would be recommendation systems and image classification systems. I guess you can try out with these projects.
Okay. Thanks for the information.
No problem, actually.
I have one question. Before that, I would like to say amazing presentation, guys. So yeah, you guys mentioned that we need data for any machine learning project. So where do we acquire such data for any projects?
There are many websites available. Like you could try using Kaggle, or any GitHub offers a few repositories where you can download your data from. But if you do not wish to use the online repositories or on the online data that is available, you could also try conducting surveys offline. But just make sure that you take people's consent before you take their data, as privacy might be an issue to people. But yeah, the data is available on online and offline on both the modes. Would Gauri and Gautam like to add to this?
Yeah, we can do some surveys.
Gautam, we can't hear you.
Is it something like web scraping can be used for the data?
Oh yeah, you can. Like if we want to talk about web scraping, there is a very good project which comes in my mind is you can movie recommendation systems. So like you can like always get into like like if you're done with one movie, you can always find the other one if you really apply it. Go to I think Netflix offers the their data set. You can find it on Kaggle. Then IMDb is there. You can like find the descriptions of the movies and all. So if you're working for that, I try to
Thank
use
you.
it.
Thank you.
Oh, I think chatbot is not accessible for everyone for some reason. Can you like check on that? I mean, it's
On
not.
GitHub?
No. Here, chat. They say chatbot is not enabled.
Chatbot?
I mean, sorry, chat
The
box.
Oh,
Yeah,
chat
chat.
box is not
oh,
enabled
okay,
for
okay.
everyone. It says it's only for the team members.
Oh, okay. We'll do one thing. We'll put all the links, everything, and we'll send you an email.
Along with your
Wait,
certificate.
let
along
me
with your
type.
certificates. Yeah, that would be good. So yeah, wait for us to send certificates. So yeah, I think it's all for the event. Thank you for joining. Is there
Can
anything
you
else?
check
Please do
now?
fill the feedback form that has been shared.
Oh yeah.
I don't think there. Can you please check now if we're able to access it?
No, I don't think so. We can access the chat menu.
Okay. Um.
Okay, it's for some reason. I don't know why.
Trying to look for the-
Okay, no problem. Like Gautam said, I'll send a mail to all of you guys so that you get the links and you can make use of it.
I thought you could try putting in the meeting notes, Gauri, if that is accessible to people.
Yes, I'll do that.
In the meeting notes.
Arvi, I guess that's just for the organizers.
And we will send in this thing only.
Yeah, sure. Fine. Thank you everyone for attending our event. I hope you had a good time and we didn't bore you with all the theory. And hope you have a great day. And I hope that you have learned something from this event. And we look forward to hosting more such events for you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wait for the mails. We'll send in. Maybe.
Yeah, you would be getting the mail in another hour or so.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. You can leave the meeting. If you have any questions, please do feel to ask, or else you can leave the meeting. Thank you.